All right, and we are online.
Okay.
Well, let's just wait a couple of seconds for everyone to join, and then we'll get started right away.
And then Tanya, we'll be recording this, right?
Yes, exactly. We will be recording this, and it's going to be made available afterwards.
Perfect, yeah. Thank you.
All the attendees are in silent mode. Okay. All right. Well, welcome to our panel discussion about software localization. My name is Tanya Falkner, and I also have my colleague Mark Schreiner with me. Unfortunately, you can't see him because we just found out that it's only possible to show 6 people on video.
Maybe it's fortunate they can't see me. I don't want to scare everybody away, you know. So
spying from the background.
Well, cheers and welcome. This is Mark Schreiner. I'm responsible for Wordbee's business in North America, and I'm based in Seattle. And before Tanya starts the introduction, I want to say that I'm jealous of all the panelists because I looked, and 2 of you are based in Phoenix or Scottsdale, and the rest of you in the Bay Area. And I'm sure you all have much better weather than me. I'm stuck up here in Seattle, and it's cloudy and like 52 degrees. So.
Oh no.
So I'm sorry. Well, I just wanted to just say, yeah, a little bit of jealousy there. But go ahead, Tanya. Please kick it off.
Join me in Luxembourg. The weather is just as nice as it is at your place.
Oh, great.
Okay, so well, as Mark mentioned, we are both from Wordbee, the makers of the Wordbee translation management system. And for this panel discussion, we invited 5 really great panelists. Thanks again for joining us. And we will discuss topics like how to prepare the codes for your software, what needs to be done early to prevent workarounds and mistakes, also the role of translation tools, managing teams of translators, and more. Before we start, I just want to mention, like I just said, we will record the panel discussion and we will share it on our YouTube channel afterwards. For the live attendees, you're all muted, but on the right-hand side in the box, you can just put your questions in there at any time, and we will try to answer them either during the conversation or afterwards. Okay, why don't we start with a little introduction? Brooke, why don't we start with you? Do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, my name is Brock Hansen, and I am in Scottsdale, and I work for a construction software company called InEight.
Great, thank you. Hanna, how about you?
Sure. So I'm a product manager for internationalization at a transportation company called Uber. And previously, I just joined 4 months ago, but previously I was running localization and internationalization at Box.
Thank you. Mauricio.
Yes, Mauricio Espinosa. I worked for a company named JDA Software based in Scottsdale. And I am the localization manager for the company.
Thank you. And then Eva.
Hi, I'm Eva Gross. I joined Stripe about 3 months ago as their first localization manager. And the program has been in existence for a while, but I'm kind of setting up the program from scratch.
That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, we have Igor.
Yeah, so my name is Igor Afanasyev. I work at Evernote for quite a while, like 12 years, and been starting the localization and translation infrastructure, developing that for Evernote, and yeah.
Oh. What about your open source tool? You should use this opportunity to advertise it.
Well, yeah, we will we'll discuss that, I guess, like later. Yeah, so we like one of the interesting things that we open source the localization tool that we use at Evernote, so that everybody can do the same kind of continuous localization that we do.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for introducing yourselves. And to start with, I'd actually, I was thinking maybe our listeners can answer a question for us in the box on the right-hand side. So my question is, what are your biggest pain points with software localization? If, of course, you're working with it, what are you struggling with? What is soaking up your time and budget? you can simply let us know in the box on the right-hand side, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But I also know that there might be some listeners who are not as familiar with software localization as some others. So why don't we start with quickly defining what it is, but also how you distinguish it from other sorts of localization. So for example, what is the difference between software and web localization? And Eva said she'd be happy to explain more about that.
I did. No, I did not. But I did not say that. I said we should probably define it. I can give you my definition that I learned at MIS, like Hanna probably did. So my definition, of course, web localization, anything you see on a website and so on. Then when it comes to software localization, there's quite a few tricky crossover cases because you can have apps, you can have web apps, which is kind of a hybrid. But nowadays, I think most of us work not in traditional software companies that Evernote, I guess. You can download a software, but a lot of times software apps will run in the web. So there's a bit of an overlap. So for Stripe, for example, I would say that our website, of course, would be considered web localization. But once you log into our dashboard to process payments, I would consider that software localization. That's a very high level explanation. Maybe someone else wants to chime in too.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can. Okay, Hanna, go ahead.
Okay. So I think that the more traditional kind of model, what a lot of people do for software localization or web localization, is that they already have a product or a website they want to adopt to other countries so that the people in those countries can use it, and that includes languages, themes, layouts, number formatting, payment methods, and whatnot. What I think it should be is that is the process of creating a product that would appeal. Once you're creating, you're already thinking about how it would appeal to these users in different countries. So normally we already have something and then we adopt it, but what we should be doing is, as we are starting to think about this new products, we're already making it global. So I think that's where software localization will go, and it will probably, still be called localization, but maybe we may be following this better kind of like model in the future.
I wanted to add that at Evernote, we don't really distinguish different types of localization. So we try to automate everything. But when it comes to like marketing material localization or like localizing screenshots or software is like the most straightforward thing to localize, because you work mostly with engineers who understand what automation is, what order is, and how to make things better. So
well, that's good. Thanks for the explanation. A couple of people answered the question in the box, and I'm just going to read through this quickly. So we have, for example, Alexander said his biggest pain point is continuous localization, many aspects of it, from setting it up right to developers' work and hands-off localization, but also how to set up payment models with vendors. What do you think about, or let's start there. What are your biggest pain points? Maybe Mauricio, what are your biggest pain points with software localization?
For us, is the fact that my company has acquired many companies over the years, and all of those companies came with some sort of a localization program and a level of translations. So the biggest pain point for us has been over the years the standardization of the terminology and the translations and the quality and the processes. So we had for quite several years, we just had a real mess. Now we are pretty well organized and looking towards the future, which is also going to be a challenge, because we're looking at a model based on software as a service via the cloud, where we'll up to the products to our customers that way. But instead of having yearly releases, we're going to have continuous releases, which is a challenge for the translation part, because they have to keep up somehow. And of course, people that don't know about translation always want to suggest to use some sort of automated or machine translation, which is it's another topic.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing for us. It's just having such a mess for so many years.
Mm-hmm. Is it how did you deal with it? What did you do to get it all sorted?
Well, the first thing was to basically standardize the process for how every product line that we acquired did the localization process and how they were processed and approved and funded and so forth. And the second part, which is the most challenging one, and we have not been able to really completely fix that, is standardizing the terminology specifically, well, not only in the English source, but also in the translation. So we have sometimes translation memories that you can see the history on them of many people have worked over the years with different opinions as to what a term should be translated, and it's just very costly to try to clean something like that up. So we're focusing most primarily on the future, where we're going, so that we can reduce those problems going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think for us, Mauricio, is very similar. Instead of buying new companies, we just barely entered the global market about 2 years ago. So we had to take a very old, normal development program and implement globalization, internationalization rules. And so we had to change how the development process and thoughts happened. We had to institute, regex files, and you couldn't have hard-coded text. And so doing all of those different steps to get a product that's able to continuously be localized has been the hardest thing. And implementing that change from the top down, we've had great support from our C-level suite trying to push this out, but it's been really difficult to implement that change all the way down through the every team, through the QA to the developers, to just get it to be engaged all the way through and follow those steps. It's been the hardest part for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question for Brock and for actually everybody. It would be nice to know what the volume of translations is, because we're from different companies, and different volumes of translation require different tools and different approaches. So it would be nice for us internally and for everybody who are listening to us to understand what kind of the sizes of localization that's happening with the company. I'll start with us. For us, it's just we're a pretty small company, I would say, compared to others probably on the panel. Our volume of translation is about 15 to 20,000 source English words per month. So I'd like to see how that compares to others, so to better understand the challenges with that.
How many languages are you moving to also, Igor?
It's 25 plus languages, plus because a couple of languages are supported by volunteers, so we're not paying for them, and they are we're partially translating Evernote into those languages. But 25 is the number of languages that we translate on the constant basis.
So Igor, one thing, I can't quite answer that question yet because I'm kind of starting the program and figuring out what people need. And of course, when you first start a program, you have a giant push to get things localized that haven't been, and then you get to a point of maintenance. And I think that's what people are probably asking about when we're talking about continuous localization, is the maintenance period after you've kind of done your first initial big launches. But what I do want to mention, what I found most difficult in my career, not so much only just at Stripe, where this is still getting ironed out, but in the past, is fitting into the Scrum cycle, into development workflow. So ideally, of course, you don't just have TEP, you also have on-screen QA before you push something live for either software or web localization, and allowing time for that, allowing time for linguistic testing on screen to take place, having those bugs logged, having engineers fix those bugs, then doing bug fix verification, and then if it's not fixed, doing the whole thing again. That is the most difficult thing, because in today's world, people might change copy to the last time, or sorry, to the last minute. So then you might not always have the most up-to-date localization on the site. So the whole idea of simship is really elusive when you have people not doing code freezes, not doing scope freezes, and things like that. So this is kind of what I found, is that people really need to leave time for localization, and it's really hard for a non-localization professional to understand that it does take time, and that it's not just, oh, we can use 1 hour translation or Google Translate, and no big deal if you use Google Translate for a day and then replace it. Well, meanwhile, our global reputation is shot if we have a really crappy about page or something like that. So that's the hardest thing that I've found.
I have something to add to that. Yeah, that's a very interesting problem that I've seen, at a lot of companies. How do you fit in? And I think there are a couple of small solutions that don't actually solve the big problem, but make it less painful. So one of them can be, if you're operating on a pretty big scale, then you can batch projects up into smaller pieces so that translators can deal with them right away. The problem with that then becomes, how do you batch in such a smart way that you don't just put a Frankenstein of a batch together and then translators no longer understand which products they are translating, or is it like a marketing piece of material, and they no longer have this context. So at Uber, our volume is 2 million words per month. We are batching stuff, but what we've noticed is that with the system that we're using, it's not really, the way that it's set up right now, it doesn't allow us to batch in a very smart way. So what we're seeing is that we're getting more and more questions from translators because they don't understand where the string belongs. Okay, so we are able to move pretty fast, but because we haven't batched them well, they don't know what they're translating pretty much. So if you do want to solve this through batching, then batch smart. And I think the second way that we have that we've been trying to address this is that we have created a tool that actually dispatches updated translations to a mobile app build that is already in the App Store that people are already using. So the way that it works is that it checks which translation strings every build has. Then when the user goes into the app, we check for that build number and we know what went into it. If we know that there has been a delta, then the library in the application calls our data store to see what the delta is, and it grabs it, just the delta. And that way we keep the translations updated for the user. So that way you don't have to fit your localization testing, into the before the build went out to the store, because it may sit there in the store for a week, right? Usually it takes some time for them to approve. In that time, you can test your app, and then you can dispatch the translations back to it. So these are some of the ways that we've solved. To be honest, we're struggling to get adoption of this tool that I described because it requires some additional development on the mobile engineering side.
Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that at GDA? Not how do you deal with it, but what's your approximate number of translations a month?
Who you are talking to?
Sorry, Mauricio, you, yeah.
Oh, well, we support 53 different products right now, and we're developing 8 new products in-house. So we're not going to go through the acquisition business anymore, because that was a real painful experience. So we do several million words per year. I don't really know the exact count, but every product has a different number. We do maintain 18 languages and handle on a one-on-one basis about 6 other languages.
Mm-hmm. So we do. We have 11 applications, and they span both, as Eva said, the web app kind of hybrid software. We also have a desktop. We have mobile applications, iOS, Android. We're only in 4 languages right now. It's looking to expand as we continue to grow. So we do right now, as we get all the documentation and the training. I think Eva said we have that big push to get everything done. We've been running anywhere between 30 to 40,000 words a month.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Quickly jumping back to you, Hanna, you said you had a couple million words a month. Did you, maybe I missed that, did you mention how many languages you're translating into?
We've got 50 languages.
50 languages, okay, yeah.
I think it's, I want to bring up this problem that we had because you asked about our existential problem at our job. So our problem is that we have all of this content, right? 2 million words, 50 languages, and we want to make it personalized to the user. So at Uber, I was describing it to Eva the other day. So I kind of like sharing this problem because it should be exciting for everyone because it's really hard for localization. So we have content that's being produced at HQ and distributed globally, right? Just like a traditional localization model, right? So we've got the marketing side, we've got the products, support, emails, text messages, all of it we translate. But then we also have regional teams that create content just for the cities in their region. And we have city teams who want to create really short pieces of content that only lives for a couple of hours. Okay, and they just want it for that city. In fact, they only want it to appear in at an airport, for example. They also want to customize the product options for their city. For example, if you're calling Uber in San Francisco, you get the options of Uber Pool and UberX. If you're calling it in India, you get some other options, right? So we actually allow the city teams to customize their product offerings within the application. And then you have all these people producing content that sometimes lives for a long time and sometimes it lives for a short time. And then you have the users who may stay in the same city, but they may also travel around the world. Okay, so nobody's guarantees that a user who speaks one of the languages from India doesn't travel to the US. Okay, and if they do, they will get the US set of content in Hindi, for example. So our problem is kind of the problem that has to do with personalizing these products at a scale. And I think it's the problem that I hear about any sort of a product, right? Even if you produce a physical product, you have the same problem. You're producing at a massive scale, but it still has to fit all of these individual users, right? So for us, it's a really interesting challenge to set up the infrastructure for that, and how do you channel all of this content through localization? How do you know which languages it will be used in before translating it? And then how long will the content live? And then how do you set up the system so that these city teams, for example, can go and change stuff really quickly, or add things, that something that would only exist for a few hours. So that's been our problem.
Tanya, can I ask a couple questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Mark from Wordbee, and I'm listening to Hanna describe that challenge, and I got to say I was just at the Expedia presentation last night. They did the Seattle Localization Users Group had a meeting at the Expedia office last night, and they talked about their content generation system, and they've got this really cool system that involves taking UGC and doing a sentiment analysis around it, and then using some different algorithms to automatically create content in 30-something different languages. And I was just amazed at this kind of development. And I'm listening to Hanna, and I'm wondering what really cool applications of technology have you or the other panelists seen in the last couple of years to help you solve some of these type of problems? Because we need to use technology and automation to scale both in terms of breadth and width, but also to to adapt towards these very specific needs of certain geographies or text types, etc. So are there any examples that you can give or share with us of really cool applications of technology that have helped software localization?
I can quickly start. One of the applications that I've seen that would give more context to translators in a traditional way are the auto-generated screenshots. It's pretty cool that you can run something and then attach something automatically to a string, so that just these questions from translators wouldn't arise. Another application I've seen.
So just to clarify, I'm sorry, just to clarify, basically what you're letting the translator do is see the context of what they're working on, so they can get a more accurate. Okay, got you. Thank you.
Yeah. So another application that I saw when I joined Uber is an internal tool that allows these city teams that I described to create these tiny products within the existing applications. So anyone can go into that tool and change the way that the application would look for their market. Helps. I was talking to somebody yesterday. We were talking about how Uber didn't do really well in China and had to withdraw, and what they said was, kind of like the general thought that the people in China expressed about Uber is that it wasn't agile enough to quickly respond to what was happening, in the city. So that, for example, there is an event and some of our competitors were really quick to, do a promotion for that event. I don't know, somehow to plug into that event, and we weren't quick enough. So with this tool, it actually allows people to customize the app to the extent that they can be agile and perform act like they're based in that local market. Okay. And so I'll let everyone else.
I was going to say those are awesome examples. And Brock, Mauricio, Igor, Eva, do you have any examples that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do. I'll go next, I guess, if you give me a minute. We have one of the biggest things is to display or input the current development immediately into production. And so to stay agile and to provide continual development, we have software developers all over the world. And so we have to have everything's done in the cloud, the development's in the cloud. And so we have a versioned, controlled system in the development process. And so having tools that can connect and the APIs that can reach into those softwares to pull out the content, to create the localization projects, to send off to the translators, to automate that process saves us thousands of hours every month, just giving us an opportunity to simply have it automated so that the content measures the difference, says this is the new content, creates a project, sends it to the translators, that kicks off the project, they do the translation, and we get it back, drops it back into the VSTS or into the software code, and then we just do the in-context review and make sure that it gets deployed correctly to the right environments. It speeds that process along and allows it all to be automated instead of having to manually manipulate pieces. But those API connections are probably for a software development, from my perspective, a huge piece of what happens to help software development localize stuff in multiple languages.
That's pretty cool as well.
Talking about, Brock, I probably missed the name of the tool. Do you use something like off the market? Or?
Yeah, so we actually use the TMS system that we use is called XTM, and so we worked with them to develop an API that connected directly from XTM, the TMS, the translation management system, directly into Microsoft's version controlled code database repository to grab the difference and measure that. And so it was a fun development piece to put together and to be able to use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's to your needs, right?
Right. But it's pretty general too. I believe it's a tool that is available for anybody using that TMS too now that we've developed it.
Yeah, that's cool, because what I like, as I'm talking to other people in the industry, there are many people, many companies who do like really interesting things in terms of automating their localization processes, but they stay internal to the companies and they're like highly tailored to their specific needs.
Right.
And for example, like something that Uber created internally probably will not be something that any other smaller company could like easily use.
We have not open sourced it, so yeah. Sorry guys. But if though it would fit a smaller company, they just wouldn't use all of it in the same way.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, and for us, like what's like the main difference with us is that we try to generalize the tools that we used and we open source them. So it's kind of similar to what your Brock were describing. Basically, we have a system that allows everybody to connect their version control with the translation server so that things flow automatically in both directions. And you don't have to do pretty much anything except from like initial setup of the project, saying where the strings live in the source control, where they should be exposed in a project for translators, what specific files are used from the source control, like how to parse them, how to pre-process and post-process them. And then you basically have this continuous flow when you don't have to really split your translation task into sprints. Is like fully continuous influx of new strings for translators to work on, and then as soon as they translate each specific string, it gets integrated back into source control. So that's a tool that we have. Go check it out. It's called surge.io.
Okay, definitely.
I just would like to jump in and say, you know, the application that you just described sounds really cool, and it sounds very, very similar to the capabilities of Wordbee's Bbox, which includes hot folders and allow you just to drop in as many files as you want. It'll take out anything that's hasn't been translated before and translate it and then send it back and then go right back into your CMS or whatever your system is. But I also would like to have a follow-up question. What do you see, and this is open to everybody, is there a value for live preview or in-context translation? Would it be helpful for the translator to be actually translating live on the site, or at least do a live preview? And do you have systems that allow for that?
Yes, we do, but they're not very, usually not very practical, because the number of products that we have, it will require an incredible amount of server and installations for, and then the other problem for us is the access from external vendors into our network. So even though that's a great idea, it's sometimes it's not very practical. So we use a system very similar to it's been discussed in a couple other topics. They have to provide the screenshots for the context for the translators. And what we're working on for the future is a system where we have a terminology repository where the idea is to reduce the number of words, because today, you know, we have so many applications and we have so many versions of the same word, and sometimes with upper cases, lower cases, with a colon or ellipsis, and all that it creates more word count, and it sort of defeats the purpose of automatic translation, or repetition, translation of repetitions. So we have a system where now we will have a term is added to the repository. Any of the new products that are going to be using that term can only use that term. The developers cannot start adding terms on their own. They can, if they're going to add a term, it already exists. The system will not let them add it. And then the term will have access for the translators, where they can see a definition of the term. They can see whether it's a verb or a noun. They can see screenshots of where it appears, so they can have an idea also about the length of and the number of characters available. And they can also ask questions, because that's one of the biggest things when we have content that is not very clear and out of context for translators to understand how they should translate something. They can actually enter the system via the cloud and ask questions and get the answer right away. And that reduces the number of queries that we have to process every month. And that is a big goal of ours, to be able to reduce that. And of course, the important thing is to be able to very quickly, as soon as a term is added, it is automatically sent to the translation team for them to get it translated. And of course, the idea is also to use some sort of machine translation, and we're debating how we're going to adapt that and try to reduce quality issues when it is exposed to our customers.
And I want to add to that. The first question was whether there is value in context, and I think we can all attest that we get hundreds of questions from translators who do not get enough context. And these questions, we did a quick estimation with our team at Uber, and just answering those questions can take up about like 10% of your time for the team. If your team is small, you don't have a lot of content, that 10% may translate into maybe 1 hour of your weekly work. But for us, it's going to translate into one full-time employee. That's a lot of time that people are wasting, right? So there is no question that we need more context for translators. How else are you gonna know what translation to provide? Also, if when we give more context to our team, they feel more involved, so they feel more excited about a product when they see it. Okay, they may say, like, they may talk to their friend and they can say, I translated this exact string and look how it appears in the UI. It's really cool. I also remember feeling that first excitement of translating my first software string and actually seeing it appear in the actual build. So it's not just, when you give context to people, it's not just the productivity, which is kind of like it's no-brainer that it increases when you give more context, but also it gets them emotionally involved with the work that they're doing, which I think that we all need a little bit more of, right?
No, I think that's a great observation. I mean, it just makes the whole thing seem that much more real. Otherwise, it's very abstract, right? I'm translating this, but where's it going to end up? But if you can actually see it, and you're like, yeah, that's it. It just makes it more real. And I'm not going to go too much onto a sales path here, but I just do want to mention that Bbox has this live preview function that we see a lot of our customers use, but we can go more into that later. Let me ask just I don't want to monopolize all the questions here, Tanya, so you can shut me up anytime, but I'd ask just a couple more questions. What if any of you could wave a magic wand and you had this tool or process that would just solve a lot of issues for you, what would that be? What I mean live preview or in context review is maybe is kind of up there, but let's even go beyond that. What would just make your life or your job so much easier and more rewarding? What would that be?
I can probably answer this one, and it kind of bridges from the last question that you had, Mark. So Hanna mentioned that it's about 10% of localization manager's time to provide context. For Evernote, we have just one localization manager, and it's literally like 70 to 80% of the time that we are spending just providing context to our translators. This is our biggest pain point. This is something that ideally we would like to be as much automated as possible, and that's why live previews and like live translation in context translation is the ultimate goal that we have, and I bet every company has. The only problem is if we are about to use any external solution for that, this largely means that we're more tightly coupling our products. Like we have to implement something on our product side to support this kind of live editing and live previews. And that's something that not only Evernote, but I heard from other companies as well, they are reluctant to do that. Adding external dependency to some external tools and clients, like for example, at Evernote, there are millions of people using Evernote clients every day. If those clients have to talk to some external server, that we're adding some hard dependency, and that's something that we would like to avoid. So I don't have a good answer to this. On one hand, we definitely want to have this ability. On the other hand, the only way for this to be feasible for our company is to create something ourselves so that we can trust and can host on our servers. But ultimately, if I had a magical wand, I would just make that happen and have an internal tool that allowed us to do all the live in context translation of everything.
Well, Igor, I'm going to tell you that today's your lucky day. You've waved your magic wand, and it's appeared because Bbox can be hosted on your servers. But I'm not gonna push too hard on that. But I would like to ask some of the other panelists as well. Is there something else? I mean, we can jump off the live preview thing. But is there anything else that would make your lives easier, more rewarding? Brock?
Yeah. For us, because of the number of products that we have, and some of those products are so large that it's impossible to provide training to translators to know how to use one of our applications. It would take months, of training for each product. So it's thoroughly unrealistic. So, and the same thing applies to doing a live translation in the application, because the applications are, some of the applications have over 1 million words, right? And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of screens. So you could spend a lifetime trying to do that unless you have those sort of automation process. So for us, what is the way that we look at in the future is for the customers themselves to be able to customize. They'll have in the database, in the terminology, they can customize to whatever they want. So if they don't like the translation that we provide, they can do their own translation. And every time there are updates, those translations that they've done for themselves will be protected. And it also is incredible in our industry, which is all the supply chain, transportation and manufacturing and so forth. Even in the same country, customers have different preferences for terminology. So for us, it's impossible to say that we're going to make every customer happy. So the idea for them to do their own, based on their own experience and the day-to-day terminology in the specific areas where they worked on, is a way to solve a lot of the issues that we have. And it also reduces the amount of QA that we need to do for the quality of the translations.
That's a fascinating concept. So basically, you're providing the core translation, and then you let your end user customize to their user environment. That's
in some of our applications, they are so large that very many different people will use small portions of those applications, right? So they only need to be concerned with the area that they work on. And when you multiply that by the number of languages and the number of customers that use our products worldwide, it would be impossible for us to be able to keep up. So we provide a basic layout, with the best translations that we think there should be, and then the customers take it from there. And amazingly enough, it really doesn't change that much. We've seen a lot of what the customers do, and occasionally there is a term or two that they're very fussy about for whatever reason. And in the past we couldn't really do anything about it because we couldn't have 10 or 15 different translations for the same term. It would be ridiculous. But so the solution is that for us, so I don't know what else. We haven't really had any other ideas.
No, that's a great idea, and I can't grant your wish on that one, but I think someday we'll get there. That is really, really cool. Let me ask you this. Let's jump off of technology for a second. If I look at the panelists and in your backgrounds, your bios, you have a tremendous amount of experience, both in terms of, length in the industry, length in your jobs, but also, each one of your organizations is doing things a little bit differently. And that's, I guess, a common trend across the local industry. Every organization, they have their own culture, they have their own tools. Sometimes they build their own proprietary tools. They have their own set of challenges. And so it's not always an apples to apple comparison, but you have this huge amount of knowledge collectively here. What advice would you give to the listeners or the attendees of this webinar in terms of two things? One, advancing their career. When every organization is doing something differently, you know, and if at some point I want to get ahead, what are my opportunities to learn from outside sources and then bring that back? And what are the best practices in terms of advancing my career? What advice would you give? And let's go around and get everybody in this one. And maybe we can start off with Brock, because I haven't heard you recently.
Yeah, I would say I went and got my certified project management from the Localization Institute, and that was an amazing experience just to get a baseline input of what is localization, what's the best practices, how do you move your current tool or processes from a very generic or process to a repetitive, quantified, KPI measured product. And so that project management certificate from the Institute, the Localization Institute, was fantastic. And then I always make sure that I'm informing myself on the most latest recent information, whether it's webinars like this or different things that are produced. The LSPs in general have a great source of information that they send out every month in blogs and things that you can read. Wordbee does it as well. So I usually subscribe to all of those and just make sure that I stay in touch with the most recent opportunities so that when there's a need, I can be ready to fill that need and promote myself and my career.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brock. Eva, what advice would you give?
So what I would say is, number one, try to report to a revenue generating team. Don't be in a cost center. So it's good to be under product or marketing and not in a, not just be seen as a cost center. A lot of times what I have seen is that when you join a small company, people don't really understand what localization is, and they don't necessarily understand that it doesn't mean that it's not international product management or international product marketing management. So by definition, you're going to get to do a lot of work that might be outside of the scope of localization, which I know Hanna's been doing, and I did also. I became a product manager in my last job. And it's just something where you have a chance not just to expand your career in localization, but in general. So in my experience, people don't stay in localization more than 10 years. Most people move out into a totally different role. Could be product management, could be project management more generally, could be something else. So I think it's also important to keep an eye on what's next after localization. For a lot of people, that is interesting to do long term. That's what I would say. But within localization, in terms of staying informed, definitely I would say industry events are helpful, articles are helpful, networking events, webinars, and so on. But I think that localization, if you're a small team within a company, it can be quite isolating because you actually don't have too many other people to learn from. So you have to be kind of a self-starter and kind of, really make an effort to do it yourself. But I think it's also just interesting. You also have a chance to learn a lot from others because people tend to be really interested in localization. So you have a chance to educate them, and they in turn will then teach you how does SEO work, how does SEM work, and all kinds of other interesting topics. So deviating a little bit from your question, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity to just learn about all kinds of stuff when you're in localization.
I think that's some awesome sage advice as well. And I really like the point about reporting to a revenue generating business unit. And that's some very sound strategic business advice there. And I think a lot of loc professionals are really focused on the loc work and maybe less focused compared to some other types of business units, less focused on the internal dynamics in terms of, like you said, reporting, not being a cost center. So that's great. Anybody else like to jump in on that? Any additional advice? Hanna, Igor, Mauricio?
Yeah, sure, I can add some. So I'm really terrible at planning my career because I have none of the moves that I've made I have planned. What I would advise though is first keep learning from the people around you, because most of the times, think about how lucky we are. We are never our own team. We always work with all the teams across the organization. That's a tremendous learning opportunity. If you ever want to go outside of localization, you can do so much even at the same company. So just learn learn everything that has to do with what you're working on. For example, at Box, I learned, well, actually, let me just start that I was learning to be a translator and interpreter, and then I learned about that localization existed. So I started learning about localization. When I joined Box, I learned about localization, but I was working with product managers. I learned something about product management. Now I'm a product manager for internationalization. Who knows, you know, what opportunities the next environment is going to provide. So always learn this context. The second one that that is really important is every single organization that you join, you need to understand how the business works and who the customer is. Learn as much as possible about the customer and about the business, because whatever you do in that organization, the best person in the room is the one who knows customers and the business, whatever you do. And finally, I've been just reading a lot and attending events. If you're in the Bay Area, IMUG, Women in Localization, SF Globalization, there's so much to go and see. Also, if you're a localization manager working on software localization, go to product conferences, right? Like go to events that surround your area, but that are not localization. Because guess what? If you go to localization events, you're going to start hearing the same exact thing over and over again. You already know that. You're not learning anymore. Unless you have something to contribute, then there's no way, I mean, there's no point in going anymore. Go somewhere else. I did this presentation at a product event. They were astonished. They never thought about building global products, you know. It was super fresh to them. And then I learned from them a lot, right? So just try to throw yourself into an environment that's less comfortable. And then finally, just reading, and I would beg of the people who are listening to this, if you have come up with a new practice, just share it. Don't think, oh, maybe I'm like, maybe this practice is not so interesting, maybe nobody will like it. Just share it out so that we can all grow, because that's how, because we're so lonely in our companies, that is the only way for us to learn from each other and do something new, is to learn from that one person who did something differently. So yeah, that's my call for action for people to share.
This is really amazing advice. I mean, I hope we're recording this, Tanya, because
we sure are. Yes.
This is really, really good. We're running close, almost out of time. I just have one last question, and then I'm going to shut up, I promise. Like I said, I was at this Expedia event. It was actually the Seattle Localization Users Group event at Expedia, and they have this content generation and translation team, and the way their performance is measured, it has nothing to do with some of the traditional performance measurements in the local industry, which are related to cost or quality or turnaround time. So, you know, they are measured on conversions. So if they do a good job, conversions go up, and that's ultimately what that team, how they're judged. Let me ask the people here very quickly, what are the key metrics in terms of how your team's performance is measured? And yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I think you really have to distinguish here between B2C and B2B. I'd say this is a lot easier for B2C. Typically, you have a sales funnel, and you can, measure conversions even per like sales funnel and every step of the sales funnel. So I would say anything from engagement to registrations to conversion to lifetime value, retention cycles, that kind of stuff. So B2C, I'd say it's fairly simple. Another easy way to do it, if you want to isolate your performance from the product team or marketing team's performance, would be A/B testing. So you don't want to come up with a new product and not know the impact, so you want to A/B test it, right? Well, you don't have to A/B test the new language separately from the new design, for example, the new functionality, to really isolate the attribution to localization specifically. That would be the most clean way to do it. Does anyone do it that clean? I'm not sure. I think in essence, what happens a lot of times is that the success of the international business that a company has just gets partially attributed to localization. Another way to do it would be customer satisfaction surveys. I think for B2B though, and I'd love to hear if anyone here is B2B, if they have some experience with this, because I think it's a lot harder for B2B.
just a quick note, because I worked at B2B, we also did A/B tests on customer engagement. So we figured out a region where we already had users, and we provided the language that we thought that region wanted. And then the only way to attribute growth to localization is do the A/B testing. So to half of the users, you don't give anything new, they just keep using whatever language they were using. To half of the users, you give the option to select the new language that you've added, and then you compare if there is growth. And yes, spoiler alert, there is. So yeah, that's a good way. But a lot of companies don't have the infrastructure for A/B testing, so it may be harder. Gotta find creative ways to then measure. But it always has to do with customer, by the way. So whoever your customer is, whether it's the end user or it's an internal team, your measurement should not be your like operational KPI. It should be how you're impacting the customer.
I think you know what, I think that's true, but I think even in my company, there's a question of how much easier am I making my internal stakeholders' lives? Because let's say they have more time freed up to dedicate towards new ideas or development because I have created a better process that lets them, you know, eliminate some of the churn, then I think there's some value there as well.
Yeah, and your customer can be an internal customer as well, because so we are building for the localization team. So our goal is to make them more productive, so that this is the customer that we're going to measure for. Yeah, but I'm not going to say that, oh, my measurement is like how much time I spent developing this thing, because that's just an operational KPI.
Thank you.
Well, as Mark mentioned, we're like almost out of time, but if you are guys okay with it, is it okay to go a little bit over time, because there are quite a few questions from our listeners, and I'd love to get to those as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to leave because I have another conference coming up right now. So.
All right, that's too bad. Are the others ready for answering a couple more questions, though?
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. Well then, Mauricio, thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
It was great to have you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Mauricio.
Okay, so I'm looking at the questions right now, and Russell was asking, how do you handle localization in an agile environment? For example, if you deploy every week or even every day. What do you think about that?
I can answer that. So for us, it works like that. A developer commits a new string into some branch for a product. Within 10 to 15 minutes, that string appears for translation, and translators can start working on it right away. Obviously, all our translators are scattered around the globe. They are working in different time zones, so it can be anything between 5 minutes to a day when the translation actually happens on our server. And then, again, within 10 to 15 minutes, that translation is being integrated back into version control. And this kicks off continuous integration builds. So everything is fully automated. We have an internal translation memory, essentially. So if the string is already translated in some other product, this means that the overall turnout time would be like 10 to 15 minutes. So we don't plan this in kind of agile cycles or like 2-week sprints, whatever. It's just like really continuous way of thinking about localization. As soon as we have the string, we have it in our pipeline, and it gets integrated in the product as soon as possible, and we have internal builds to test on.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Russell, I hope that answers your question. Then we had another one saying, during continuous localization, how do you ensure continuous translation quality?
Anybody? I can continue about like everything related to that, but like if anybody wants to chime in first.
I think you have to accept that the quality will not be ideal, and you have to accept that also your users are not linguists, so they may not really care that the quality is ideal. What you have to track though is whether the quality is so bad that the user cannot possibly use the end application, or is it acceptable enough that the end user is okay with that. So your best case scenario is that you're running continuous localization, you're giving translators enough context and then you're running LQA continuously on that, hopefully with a good tool, and you release perfect quality. But then if you think about it, you're kind of operating a business. Do you want to pay for great quality for messages that are an error message that will appear once a year for half a user? Probably not, right? So that's when you can think about how will you handle the different parts of your application and what kind of quality you want for that, because most of the users will be okay with subpar quality for a random error message, but they need to see a perfect first, second, and third screen or an onboarding experience. So, and then how you do it by giving lots of context, asking the developers to put in a description for the string, make sure that that developers in the first place understand that they're developing for an international audience and they're following best internationalization practices. You attach screenshots to whatever you're sending. You give your translators heads up, do regular trainings with them so that they know what they're translating. But like I said, that's a lot of work, and you may not want the best quality in some cases.
I think another. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was going to say to Hanna's point too, is having a good glossary and a terminology and a tool that references back to those prior translated strings, so they can see, maybe you don't have the screenshot of that screen, but you have that string length translated in another part of the application that comes up, and it gives you that fuzzy match that they can reference off of. Gives you an opportunity to have the definition of the terms that are hard, so they get the context maybe through the definition of the glossary term that comes into the string line as they're translating. So having the right tools in place help that quality too.
I would like. Oh. Sorry.
I was going to say one last piece to maybe add would be to really empower the translators, the linguists. So Hanna mentioned training, so training, but also so that they feel ownership. That you don't have an LSP that just rotates linguists continuously, but having people that really get to know your company and your product and really feel pride and ownership and bother learning about it too and care about it. I would say that adds to everything everyone else just said too.
I wanted to add that continuous localization doesn't mean that you're continuously deploying unverified strings into production. Continuous localization means that you're removing all the friction in the process. You're removing all the delays when it comes to translation. So translators get strings as early as possible. They have more time to do the translation. We see those strings exposed for translation as soon as possible, and it means that we have more time to provide context. We have more time to do multiple rounds of QA before something is shipping. So continuous localization actually improves your quality because it gives you much more time on doing QA and providing and having more time, more leeway for actual translation.
Mm-hmm. Before moving on here with the listeners' questions, Eva, just quickly to what you said about getting the translators involved. Do you think it's possible to get them, to get external translators involved enough, or are you all just working with internal translators and internal teams?
I personally shy away from internal teams, and for the simple reason that I'm kind of a language snob and I want people to be in market. I want them to translate into the native language in market. This is kind of what we learn best practices in our master's program. And so, no, I would never have them in-house. So yes, no, I would not have them in-house. I do think, however, that the relationship building part is important, and that in our industry, we all are used to building good remote relationships, right? All of us are in different locations as we speak. So I think that part is just super important.
Okay.
For us, we're using freelancers, so it's a mix, like a good mix of like a win-win situation when we have dedicated translators, dedicated linguists for each language. They know the product and they are essentially the same as you'll get from in-house translators, but they are located in their regions. They actually understand the market, so and it costs less than going to LSP. So
I want to chime in because we do have in-house people, and they are amazing, but they don't really do translation all the time because we have 2 million words per month. What they do better than freelance translators is when you get a really important marketing document that needs to reflect the voice of your brand, or if you have a legal document that needs to be translated just in a specific way, that's what they would take over. So they would kind of curate that. Also, what they really do well is when we have a release upcoming and somebody, of course, gives us the content like a minute before releasing it. This is where they can step in and work really fast on that content in these emergency situations. And they also serve as a pivot for our external team because they can do trainings with them. They're essentially doing the same job, right? Translating. So it feels like a peer-to-peer training. So it's nice when instead of a localization manager, you are trained by your peer. It doesn't feel as threatening.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then next question is coming from Maria. She's asking about the tool you were talking earlier, Hanna, to smooth your app localization. Is it external or internal? I think she wants to know if she can use it as well, I guess.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying that our tool is internal, and Uber's infrastructure is kind of crazy. So we're building our own because it's really hard to optimize any other tool for this. We do have a third-party tool that we're using, MemSource, where translators work, but the tool that orchestrates all of the flow of continuous localization between the apps, the marketing side, and the communications is internal. There are good tools that are open source, so Surge from Evernote, Mojito from Box. There are tools out there that you can use with a small team, or it may scale in some cases. So if you don't have an internal team of engineers, you can still grab one of those tools. If your company is, is just starting out localization, these tools are super helpful, and you don't have to pay anything, and they're super easy to set up.
All right. Thank you. The next question is also about tools. Are you using tools to optimize LQA, and which ones?
Automate LQA? What does that mean? I mean,
to optimize, right?
I can answer that. So we have first of all, we support pseudo localization. Our tool can generate pseudo localized resources for every type of file format and a resource file that we use on different platforms, and this allows us to catch all the intertranslation errors earlier, which means dialog layouts, having not enough screen real estate for some copy, some strings not being externalized properly. So that really helps catch those errors as soon as possible. And our QA team uses switches our applications into this pseudo locale to see how UI looks like, and we use that internally. Like our localization manager can use that to assess the quality of interstitialization. So that's one of the big helpers here, I would say.
So from our side, we outsource all of our translations right now. We'd done some in-house, but because it was a small group, it didn't scale very well, and so we outsource everything through the LSP. And they have their own actual LQA, the linguistic quality assurance, that goes through and gets tested on a certain percentage of everything we do. But to Igor's point, one of the other part of localizations and QAing is having those pseudo files. Those are really key for us. It gives the developers a chance to do and complete their user stories, because we put in I think, Eva, you mentioned the Scrum and the how do you implement localization into the development processes. As part of the user story, we have it as part of the certification of acceptance or criteria of acceptance that they test not only the English, but they have to test the application in, for our 3 languages, you know, French, Spanish, Portuguese, as it goes on. That gets really time consuming for our developers. So by using a pseudo file where you implement all of the different special characters and you add the algorithm for the expansion so that they can go in and they can see if you're going to have truncated text. Our developers, because it's new, they have a lot of hard-coded English still. So by dropping in the pseudo, it's very evident for a English coder to still read the foreign language because it's still in English, it just has special characters on top of the regular one. So it allows the developers to complete their testing in once rather than 9 times. So it shortens that process for them too. But it helps that QA piece immediately up on the front end.
Okay, so my understanding of LQA is a little different, I guess. So what you guys just mentioned to me is internationalization testing, not LQA. LQA to me is linguistic testing.
Yeah.
So when I think of automation, it's like writing script to make sure that certain rules aren't followed, you know, that there's no sentence that's missing a punctuation at the end, things like that. So if I were to answer that question, I'm sorry, right now I don't have an answer to that because we're still starting that, but I think that there are previous LSPs I've worked with definitely have some automated QA tools that they run things through before they send it for LQA, just to eliminate and shorten the time the LQA actually takes.
For us, in addition to this, we're going to do 2 things. So one is that we have these city teams to leverage, right? In every single city where Uber operates, we have people on the ground who speak that language. So a lot of them would notice you know, mistakes in translation. So we'll see some inconsistencies. So we're going to give them access to our central tool so that they can suggest corrections easily. So we will leverage this kind of like crowd effect, if you want, to get the translations better. And also, I was thinking, you know, the traditional LQA usually happens, you know, on device. And then, but then for some reason people use a completely different system to file the tickets. I don't think that's sufficient. So for us, what I'm thinking is that we could build a plugin for the app where if people are already using the mobile device and they're looking at the application on the mobile device, that's where they can just file the bug. So instead of separating, like separately getting a screenshot, uploading it somewhere else, they can just do all of their descriptions and suggestions through that application, and that would flow into the centralized tool directly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I hope that answered that question. Jose says, if you have time-sensitive translations, but you don't have internal translators, which model did you set up with your freelancers or LSPs so that they're knowledgeable about your brand and products and available when you need them? Is that a problem you're facing?
I can take that. So we haven't had it yet, or rather we've had it, but I'm still setting up the program where we might have an incident. I'm not going to say what kind because I can't, but let's say there's an incident where we need to communicate to customers quickly and let them know, you know, something's broken or working on fixing it. I have talked to my LSP about having an SLA of having something turned around within, let's say, 2 or 4 hours. It's typically pretty short. It'll just be something to let people know, here's a link to a K-based article, here's what's going on, please stay tuned for further information. So I definitely do have some, you know, an SLA for emergency translation for that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's just communicating with the LSP, letting them know when our expectation is due. And we have a pretty dedicated team because our software is pretty expansive and generalized. I mean, it's written for the construction industry. So it's very specific is what I was trying to say. And so it's very hard to just have a whole freelance or group of open source translators come in because they don't know the terms. They don't know what we're doing. So they're very much, we engage the same translators and they're on board at pretty much any time. If we have that kind of need, we just source it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we use freelancers, and but they are they're working for us. Some of them are working for us for many years. So they know the product, they use the product. They are essentially employees in terms of like the quality of translation. The only problem is that they are located in different time zones. So you still have to account for that. And the key is planning. Obviously, if you have something to translate overnight, it cannot be done with a certain level of guarantee in all locales. So we just need to make sure that everybody understands the process, that understands that localization is something that cannot happen automatically. I mean, like the translation part, we're not doing any machine translation. So the key is just like planning, giving enough leeway time for translations, but everything else is something that we take care of because like the quality, I mean, because we use the same translators, we do not switch them.
Also, it's important to remember, especially for us, because we're kind of have a lot of stakeholders, that a lot of time sensitive translations are not that time sensitive. So they will come to you and say, I've got something that I need in 2 hours, and then you can be like, do you really need it in 2 hours? And then if you do, that's gonna cost you way more, and you're really, you know, costing our business because you didn't do your planning so well. Maybe what we were thinking is that people would be able to submit urgent requests through our system, but then what we're gonna do is that we're gonna ask for their manager's approval and just say, you know, this planning wasn't done so well. You know, is it really so urgent? And I can tell you from my experience, 95% of cases not so urgent. Yeah, so that doesn't really answer the question directly, but maybe you can hedge a little bit, even if you don't have an internal team.
Yeah, or sometimes it's good enough for them to wait for a week. So they want to translate something overnight and just say, okay, this will be ready like in a week, and they have to wait. And this kind of like really educates them next time they are going and asking something without any leeway time. So.
Yeah. And we've definitely blocked releases actually for them. So if they haven't submitted the strings at the right time, we're just going to go and talk to the product manager, and we can say, you know, it's not going to be ready. You have to delay the release. And it's kind of, yeah, it works. They will give you more time next time.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's really the difference between client side and vendor side localization work, is that, you know, pushing back on internal stakeholders, having that as a luxury, but also as a responsibility, because if you let yourself be pushed around and just produce things in 2 hours, you know, people are going to do that to you again and again. So it's really important to kind of set expectations and be polite about it, explain why that's the case. But it's just as important to say no sometimes as it is to say yes, I would say.
Yeah, and it's the client's responsibility to also protect the vendor PMs. It's our responsibility to not throw over, you know, this urgent work if we know it's not urgent.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's a great note to wrap this up. Like, I'm sorry that we cannot answer all the questions because they just keep coming in, but I don't want to keep you on this panel any longer. So for the guys who joined later, I'm just going to repeat that we did record the session, and it's going to be made available to everyone who registered, and it's going to be on our YouTube channel as well. Well, thanks for everyone for the questions. And like I said, I think we could talk all morning and all afternoon probably as well. Maybe we'll continue it at some other point. Thanks to all of you guys for joining me today in this panel discussion. It was really great to have you. And if you want to share any last thoughts, now's the time.
I'll go. For me, I love doing localization, but you have to communicate. You have to communicate with a lot of different people and be comfortable talking to product managers, product owners, to the C-level suites if you're trying to push this through as a first-time kind of opportunity. So it's been a lot of fun for me to get to know the localization world and areas. I just started about 3 years ago in this, so it's been a lot of fun. But just learn how to communicate is a great key, and to enact change, to learn how to push that through, and I think things work out pretty well.
Well, thank you guys. I guess we wrap this up now. Yeah, it was really fun talking to you, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you. It was nice seeing everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.